it would seem that the question of the philosophy of homelessness would first demand an explanation of philosophy itself. But I'm not going to talk about what philosophy is, as this would require another kind of conversation in which philosophy was the central topic. I'm merely going to talk about what I believe the philosophy of homelessness to be. As I perceive it, the philosophy of homelessness is an understanding of what homelessness is and why homelessness exists. What does it mean to be homeless? In the most literal sense, to be homeless is to lack resources to build a structure to protect oneself from the elements. The violence of homelessness is that man is subjected to the violence of the elements. All this leads to the conclusion of social ethics and economics. Here then is the decisive moral question: who owns the earth and why? When we think about this question, we can see that the earth is free, something given. Man is born as a citizen of the earth. Hence, an artificial superstructure, a power structure, is imposed upon the earth, which creates conditions of homelessness. And though this may not be the goal of the infrastructure, this is the result of the infrastructure. Man is restricted from the earth on which he is born. Or to quote Rousseau on this topic, "The man who, having enclosed a piece of ground, bethought himself of saying, 'This is mine,' and found people simple enough to believe him. From how many crimes, wars, and murders, from how many horrors and misfortunes might not anyone have saved mankind by pulling up the stakes, or filling up the ditch and crying to his fellows, 'Beware of listening to this impostor. You are undone if you once forget that the fruits of the earth belong to us all and the earth itself to nobody.'" What is homelessness? Two things: a lack of land and a lack of materials. This equation always equals homelessness. To attempt to be more precise, the economic claim against the homeless is really a moral claim. Those who do not lack say that those who do lack deserve their homelessness because they don't conform to a system which is by default given the status and authority of proper function. To be moral, one must successfully and faithfully practice this system, which is simply to state the moral presupposition on which this system is based. The strange question of homelessness is how man can be homeless on the earth. The answer is that he is the victim of an artificial system that is imposed upon the earth. Private property is not the natural division of the earth. In order to tackle the problem of homelessness, therefore, it would seem it is necessary to deal with this artificial system. That is to say, the problem is systemic and must be dealt with systemically. Why are people disturbed by homelessness? One reason is because homelessness is a form of violence, because it stands as a threat of violence to those who refuse to conform to the system. Homelessness comes before us as an ultimatum. Look what happens to those who don't obey. But homelessness is just one manifestation of the violence of this system, which is formally known as capitalism. The way capitalism deals with homelessness is to impose a moral tyranny, that one should conform to an artificial system of work and private property. Even as this property is an arbitrary distinction, even as this system amounts to the will of a minority imposing their morality on the majority. Capitalism fallaciously assumes its own justification. Capitalism assumes that a greater emphasis of capitalism is the solution to homelessness, as well as nearly every other economic problem. However, my friends, let us get it straight. Homelessness is not due to a lack of resources, but is the tyrannical outcome of a moral and economic ideology which monopolizes those resources. And the problem is that this ideology is imposed from the top down. If we will deal with homelessness, we have no choice but to deal with the system in which homelessness is itself generated. This means, whether we like it or not, we have to deal with the ideology of capitalism. If one would deny this, then one must show that homelessness is not a systemic problem. One must show that private property, as a move toward power solidification, does not lead to the material deprivation of individuals. I remember one clever Philistine who said, "Complaining about capitalism is a waste of time. The way to solve the problems of capitalism is simply to earn more money, to increase one's wealth." Yes, and the way to solve paralysis is simply to grow a new spine. Hence, the problem of capitalism, among other things, is that it consigns the masses to wage slavery. There is no way to make more money in a system that is dominated by selective accumulation, not to mention that exploitation is required to make money within the system of capital. Hence, our Philistine solution can be translated as follows. The way to solve the problems of capitalism is to exploit more people. The man who claims that more capital is a solution to the problems of capitalism hasn't understood capitalism. His suggestions at no point make contact with the defects of the system. This is like saying the way to abolish slavery is to become more proficient as a slaveholder. Perhaps we all know the quote by Bertrand Russell. "The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts." I submit to you that our defect is not merely a defect in knowledge, but a defect in the allocation of resources. The whole problem with the world is that greedy people tend to control wealth, while the people who would actually make a difference, if they but had the resources, are condemned to poverty. If wealth was bestowed, as opposed to being a form of theft, society would have to carefully select its recipients, as this gift in the wrong hands has the power to destroy society itself. I long for the day when man looks back and wonders at the stupidity of allowing the unlimited accumulation of wealth. Wealth is too important to belong to socially unconscious and socially irresponsible individuals, but should in fact be the collective property of the collective individuals who created it in the first place. Wealth in the hands of selective individuals, which is to say the most scheming and privileged among us, results in the negation of society itself. Unlimited, individual accumulation is the enemy of society. But in order to understand all this, one must think deeply and carefully about what wealth represents and what wealth means. In a system of capital, capital is the supreme power. He that has wealth can buy the system. The philosophy of homelessness, then, is the philosophy of a forced state of material being which is generated by an artificial authoritarian system that assumes the right of private property as a natural, social, binding moral state. In short, it is the moral claim that one has the moral right to violently impose and uphold the idea of private property.